Welcome to my presentation on the role of the sports scientist. So my aims of this presentation are going to be to establish the roles and responsibilities of the sports scientist, to introduce ways in which sports scientists perform their role, to discuss the benefits to using a sports scientist, and also to discuss and outline any limitations and barriers there are to the role of a sports scientist. So there's obviously lots of different definitions of what a sports scientist is and what sports science is. In general, the responsibility of sports scientists is to improve the physical and maintain the physical performance of the athlete through different inputs in terms of nutrition and their training workload, to obviously improve the output in terms of their performance on the pitch, or on the field, or on the court, or whatever the sport is that they play in. There's several definitions I've put in there at the bottom that discuss it in terms of it being a multidisciplinary interaction, and stretching it as far as to discuss the involvement of the design of new equipment and new resources within sport. So it's quite a varied definition of exactly what a sports scientist is. What a sports scientist does, I've pulled my list here simply off the EPPP, which is the Elite Player Performance Plan, set out by the Premier League, which all academy clubs adhere to. And what is included in the Elite Player Performance Plan for the role of the sports scientist, the strength and conditioning staff, and so forth, is they're responsible for physical testing and measurement of the players, injury prevention programs, diet and nutrition, medical and physical screening, anthropomorphic assessment, physiological and fitness testing, physical screening, predictive testing of size and shape, and monitoring of physical exertion. Now, some clubs will do all of that. Some clubs won't do so much of it, but that is a general list of what a sports scientist is responsible for within academy football. Now, these all start to link together. So, the diet and nutrition, the physical screening will help them put together a better injury prevention program, for example. However, this list doesn't include exactly how testing information is used, because that's going to vary from club to club, from sports scientist to sports scientist, in terms of how the VO2 max and heart rate, for example, how the testing of that can be used to design a better training program and improve the training program, and also as discussed in some of the definitions of what a sports scientist is and what their role is. It doesn't include things away from working within clubs and within a club-specific environment to, the designing of equipment and the development of sports supplements and sports drinks and things like that. In terms of the benefits of having a sports scientist, all the things that are involved there, specifically to football, but in relation to other sports as well. The use of a sports scientist can help improve the fitness, the strength, the agility, speed, and general physical performance of the athlete. That includes faster recovery times and improved recovery times, and greater workload capacity that comes from the benefits of an improved nutrition program or improved training program, and the most effective possible training program. And all this is based around keeping up with an ever-increasing intensity to sports, and ever-increasing speed, and games that have now require more rapid recovery times. And the quote I've got at the bottom there, in response to a modern game, but all this is in response to a modern game played at an increasing pace with diminishing average recovery time between intense physical action and requiring a level of fitness unknown to previous generations of elite players. There's also a nice quote there from Ryan Giggs, which shows how some players, even a player at the the very top level of his game, and has played at a very top level through different generations, and even in a period where sports science maybe wasn't involved, how he's taken to it and how players can take to it, and the benefits they as individuals can see to it, even for Ryan Giggs in a team game. So some examples of how sports scientists go about their role. Obviously, lots of different testing, but that they can do in order to be hands-on in the improvements they can make, and not just improvements they can make for individuals, but different improvements that can be made throughout the sport. Different tests for VO2 max, for sprinting, sprint speed, sprint power, agility, so change of direction, and also speed of decision making, and different jump tests. These are just some of the ones that we tested or have been tested within academy football throughout the season. It's important to note the difference, or the difference between a field test and a lab test, and the benefits to each. So with a field test, where it's more related to the sport, however, the conditions may be less in control of the sports scientists and in the hands of those that are testing it. Whereas a lab test, conditions can be kept the same for throughout different times of year, throughout different individuals taking the test at different times of the week, at different times of day. However, the lab test is less specific to the sport. And while there are more generic tests for testing VO2 max, sprint, agility, and jump, the more sports scientists and within sports, it's important to cover sport-specific tests. So I've given a couple of examples in diagrams on the side there of what can be a very general test in terms of just judging the all-out sprint of an athlete, of an individual, and then a more soccer-related and soccer-specific test there, specifically based around passing, but that's just one example. Some tests might involve more different speeds of running, different directions of running, with also passes, dribbles, and sport-related and sport-specific aspects involved in it. So sports scientists are used throughout sport, obviously within football, but also within any of the sports I've added in there, although those are only a limited example, such as judo, cycling, swimming, rugby, even sports such as curling, taekwondo. And it shows that it's a discipline that is being utilised more and more in sport. And even in that list, varies from very individual sports with single action, such as curling or sprinting in athletics, to team sports with far more varied actions, such as football. So interesting quote there to note with regards to American sports, and how this is a quote from 2010, but even as recently as then, in America, only Major League Baseball was really making a definite thing out of sports science, whereas other major sports, including basketball, American football, there was no minimal amount of hiring that needed to be done in the sports science sector. So that has changed now, but it just shows how recent the introduction of sports science have been, and how new an entity it is in sport. Even with regards to football, in academy football, still today, it is only a necessity for a Category 1 academy in football to have a full-time member of sports science and a full-time strength and conditioning coach. Far down as Category 3, there's no requirement to have any full-time member of staff, merely that the department is fulfilled in some way. So that just shows that there is still some way to go, but it is a something that is being brought more and more into a variety of sports and becoming more important within most sports. So that leads nicely into some of the limitations of sports science. As I said, it's quite a relatively new discipline. In some senses, resources might be limited, including the personnel. As I said, a Category 3 and Category 4 academy have do not have to have a full-time member of sports science staff or a strength and conditioning coach. So even if they have one, it may be that person is working alone. So the resources are quite limited. For sports scientists, trying to find that balance between the amount of study and the amount of professional knowledge that is required, including sport-specific knowledge, is quite difficult getting that as a balancing act with then getting the face time with players, with coaches, and actually performing the job at hand. Also filtering in terms of communication with coaches, getting this information from the sports scientists to the coaches that have day-to-day contact with the athletes, with the players, can be difficult in terms of coaches' understanding and coaches' trust for the information they're receiving from the sports science staff. Another issue that's starting to become more prevalent in certainly first team sport at the highest end is the more regular turnover now of staffing, of organisational changes. So, for a sports science member of staff, that's going to mean getting the trust of a new coach, getting the trust of new players as well, and getting their buy-in to what they're trying to do and their understanding of how the work they're doing can benefit them as the athletes or them as an athlete. So, in summary, sports science is a very varied field that includes the procurement of knowledge and any knowledge within sport to improve sporting performance, mostly physical performance, but performance in general. Sports scientists have a large range of roles within the sport and ways of testing performance, from what is very general across sport to very sport specific, very specific to football or rugby or swimming or curling or cycling, whatever the sport might be. Sports scientists aim to improve performance of athletes in training and competition, increase speed and intensity of sports, an ever-increasing speed and intensity of sports. That is continually improving. It's improving today, and it's for sports scientists that are obviously helping to push that on. But as they push it on, they've got to try and keep up with it as well. And in terms of limitation, sports science, as we said, is a very new introduction relative to how long sport has been around, how long sports have been around. It's a relatively new introduction to the world of sport. And so there's still lots of barriers to overcome to make full use of its effectiveness within sport. On the final page, you'll find my references. Thank you for listening to my presentation.